Leslie Cordero, a Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist at the World Bank. On behalf of the Resilient Cities Network and the World Bank, we would like to welcome all of you to this 8th installment of the Cities on the Frontline Speaker Series, Urban Heat, Cities Taking Action. The Cities on the Frontline is a virtual thought leadership speaker series which began in 2020, co-organized by the Resilient Cities Network and the World Bank Group's City Resilience Program. This provides city practitioners, the industries, and the residents that they support an understanding and a means for responding to the pandemic and its associated stresses. It also provides solutions for planning towards a more resilient recovery. And in a span of 2 years, we are proud to have over 6,000 participants from around the world who attended the sessions. A significant portion of the attendees are from city governments who shared tangible stories, real challenges, and on-the-ground experiences. Lina Lianco of the Resilient Cities Network and I will be co-hosting this session. But before we start, let me remind everyone of the intention of this speaker series and the ground rules for our conversation today. The purpose of these global seminars is to have an open and honest learning conversation. The calls are not on the record, and we ask you not to attribute any comments unless you have the person's express permission to do so. We can help you obtain this permission if needed. And today, we have more than 400 registered participants for the call. So to facilitate the discussion, may we ask you to write your questions on the Q&A function of the WebEx. And please note that the recording of this session and the PowerPoint presentations will be posted online next week. So, Lina, let's get the ball rolling. Over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lina. I'm the Global Director for City Engagement for the Resilient Cities Network. Today's session is about urban heat. And this is not actually the first time that we're discussing urban heat at the CFL series, and rightly so. Extreme heat already kills up to 500,000 people per year, making it the deadliest weather-related hazard. And cities are heating up at twice the rate of global average warming due to their structure and ongoing urbanization. So we're going to discuss all of this with three practitioners and distinguished speakers. We have today with us Kurt Shickman. Kurt is the Director of Extreme Heat Initiatives at the Arsht-Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, where he's leading and expanding the center's global work to protect people and livelihoods from the growing risks and impacts of climate-driven extreme heat. Kurt joined the center in October of last year, and his portfolio includes delivering financial solutions, public engagement through technology, policy development, and on-the-ground implementation. He leads the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, working with key partners. And prior to this, Kurt was the Executive Director of the Global Cool Cities Alliance and also former Director of Research for the Energy and Climate Team at the United Nations Foundation. Welcome, Kurt. We have also Amy Davison with us. Amy is the head for climate change in the City of Cape Town's Resilience Department, which is part of the newly formed Future Planning and Resilience Directorate. Amy has over 10 years experience in urban sustainability policy and planning in local government. Currently, her work focuses on the rollout of the city's climate change strategy and action plan, with a particular focus on climate adaptation and resilience and mainstreaming of climate change response in local government projects and operations. Last but not least, we have with us Eleni Myrivili, or Lenio for her friends. Lenio has been an advocate for environmental, nature-positive, and climate-neutral agenda for more than 2 decades. She's currently a senior consultant for heat resilience for the Arsht-Rockefeller Resilience Center and also a senior advisor to the Mayor of Athens. Since 2021, she was appointed Chief Heat Officer, Europe's first. Prior to this, she was a Deputy Mayor for Urban Nature and Climate Resilience at the City of Athens, as well as the Chief Resilience Officer. She co-chairs the steering committee of the Global Resilient Cities Network and is a Loeb Fellow of Advanced Environmental Studies at the Harvard University. Welcome all. Now, without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Kurt to set the scene and global context of our discussion today. Kurt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lena, for that kind introduction and to Leslie hosting me today. Let me share my screen here. And just to say, I'm honored to be on a panel with Amy and Lenio, two global leaders in this space. So thank you for including me on this. So I'm with the Arsht-Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, and our overall mission is to reach 1 billion people with resilient solutions by 2030. And we do that over a course of 4 different areas of focus. But today I'm going to mostly focus on the area that is my area of practice, which is our extreme heat work. And there's a good reason for why we focus on extreme heat at the center and why this is a focus for many of the cities and practitioners that are on this call. We often call, so what I'm showing you here is a set of 6 different stats, but the reality is we could have picked stats from just about every different type of urban system, human system, or other, because heat has an insidious impact across just about every aspect of our lives, urban and rural. We often call it the silent killer, because it's the #1 most deadly natural disaster, but it also has deep impacts on existing health conditions from a range of physical effects, cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary, renal, diabetes, but also on mental health and on addiction. So it really touches every aspect of our health in our lives. It has huge impacts on our economies, both today and into the future. The labor productivity impact just in the US alone today, without thinking about future climate change impacts, is about $100 billion. And without change on urban heat, studies have indicated that the average city would experience something like a 3% reduction or loss in their GDP annually in the very near future by 2050. But it goes beyond just those direct economic impacts, because when students, for example, are exposed to high temperatures, there's a direct correlation to lower school productivity. So it's not just affecting our abilities today and our economies today, it's affecting the economies of our future by impacting the educational outcome. So beyond being a silent threat, it can also be a loud threat. We've seen in Australia and India and Pakistan failing roads, literally asphalt roads turning into rivers due to high temperatures, which have huge impacts on transportation and logistics. We've seen the same with rails. And we certainly see, especially as our economies grow and more people have access to active space cooling or cooling that requires electricity, that high temperatures equal highly stressed and overstressed electrical grids, which lead to failures and brownouts that have costs that go far beyond the space of the heat wave itself, and even into food supply impacts. Now, these effects aren't localized to cities, they're widespread. We know that today over 1 billion people lack access to adequate cooling, both passive and active cooling, and that in the future, about 1 billion people will be faced with those conditions, will be faced with lethal heat on a semi-regular basis. And so it's an issue that is dire, and it's an issue that we are facing today and will be facing into the future. Now, I just got done saying that heat is a natural disaster, and we often do compare it to natural disasters like tornadoes or tsunamis or hurricanes. But the reality of it is heat is an unnatural disaster. It has a disproportionate impact on the world's poor and on communities that have the least ability and the fewest options to adapt to or escape the heat. And there are a variety of reasons for this that I think are fairly obvious, some of which are on this slide. But just like how heat exacerbates existing health conditions in individuals, heat also exacerbates and highlights the inequities and failures on a social level. And so it really is an issue that, while it may not be the top issue in every category and threat that we face, if you peel back and look at where heat is in terms of its impacts on our society, it's near the top and across a wide variety of categories. And so the flip side and positive thing to say about that then is that action on heat can have these beneficial impacts on an equally wide variety of social conditions and human health conditions. And so that's really what's driving our focus at the Arsht-Rockefeller Center. And we've organized our work around what I would say are 4 key challenges. The first is that heat is a multidisciplinary threat. There isn't, in my opinion, such thing as a heat expert. There are so many different ways that you can approach this problem, and they need to work together to solve it effectively. And that's from academic disciplines and research all the way down to people who understand communities and cultures where these interventions and work need to be done to be most impactful. There is an awareness gap in the public that we need to address. Despite the danger of heat, the perception of the danger of heat is not equal to the actual danger. There's not in many places, a coordinated response. Heat will fall into many different municipal agencies and ministries, into many different civil society budgets and activities. And there aren't, in many cases, opportunities to coordinate that action to make it the most effective. And the final challenge goes back to while there's a personal and public lack of awareness, there's also a lack of awareness on the global scale that is affecting our ability to go from doing demonstrations and pilots to getting to real scale with the types of solutions we need for heat resilience. And so those are the sort of challenges that we are building our work around at Arsht-Rock. So let me talk really quickly about how that plays out in practice. The first is the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance. And we're very honored to have RCN as a member of this alliance. This is a group of 50 organizations and individual experts across a wide variety of different disciplines, which you can see here. And the idea was to gather those experts into one place and have them be able to talk to each other and work together, both to advise the work that we do, but also to find ways to implement together new resources, new projects, that sort of thing, so that when we're working in cities and in communities, we're bringing the right experts to the table to do so. That work is being guided right now by something called the Heat Action Platform. We just launched this at the World Economic Forum this year, a couple weeks ago. And the idea here was to get in one place the learnings of the experts in the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance and combine it with the work that's already being done by the UNEP, the Cool Coalition, RMI, the Biodiverse Cities Commission, and others, so that we can have a one-stop location and platform, not just for information on how to assess the risk of heat in your communities, and how to plan effectively different policy and technical interventions, how to implement them, and then how to assess whether they were successful and what to do next. There's a knowledge resource there, but really our intention is to create a platform for people to reach out to us, connect with us, so that we can support that their journey towards heat resilience together. And so you can see the URL down there at the bottom. The second challenge was the idea around closing the heat awareness gap for people. And we're doing that with a couple different initiatives. The first is a heat season campaign that's available in 6 languages currently. We're looking to add a number of others. And this is really just a high-level social media, right off the shelf campaign that mayors or others could pick up and use to help raise awareness of heat and what practical things citizens can do to protect themselves from heat waves. We're also working in 6 cities, including in Athens, to take the next several steps in improving the efficacy of the way we warn and advise people about coming weather conditions and heat waves. So right now, across the globe, with very few exceptions, our warnings are based solely on the weather conditions that we're expecting. And what we wanted to do was create a system that would be more based on the impact that those weather conditions would have on human health. And so what you're looking at is the back end of a system that Athens is using now, that we'll be launching in Seville next week, that links the weather forecasts from the Met Office with a locally specific set of algorithms that allow us to assess the potential health risk of the population and to call warnings based on how high that risk will be. And so we've created 4 categories, and different warnings can go out at different levels to different people. So it provides some flexibility to really drive home the message that action is needed, and that certain resources that may not be needed for a very mild heat wave maybe need to be recruited for a very dangerous one, similar to how we deal with hurricanes. We don't typically evacuate for a Category 1 hurricane, but you may have mandatory evacuations for a Category 5 hurricane. So it allows some scaling similarly with heat waves. As you know, this issue of heat has been out in front in many publications, and we've been working to move that forward as well. That's not certainly just our work, that's the work of this community of practitioners that are being noticed, and we're excited to see that it's a rate that the awareness is being raised, and we're seeing it in media around the world on a very regular basis now. The third challenge is how do we coordinate and make coherent a planning and response to extreme heat in cities. And so we created a pilot program called the Chief Heat Officer, and I'm very honored to be joined by the world's first Chief Heat Officer, Lenio, who you'll hear from later today. And the idea here was to create a single focal point for a city's action on heat resilience, recognizing that action is being taken in many different places. And so we have actually 5. I didn't have a chance to update it, but we have a fifth municipal CHO in Monterrey, Mexico. And we'll be adding different types of CHOs in the future, just as to demonstrate how this type of position would work in an international organization, at a country level, and perhaps in other types of organizations as well. We've also been adding to the research around economics. So I mentioned the $100 billion impact on labor productivity in the US today. That was from a report we did last August. But we wanted to expand that report and start to look at cities around the world. So we have a 13-city study that's looking at the labor productivity impact of heat in those cities. And you can see them here on the map, but also to look at a specific economic sector of importance in each of these places. So together we'll be able to say what the reasonable number and what the global impact is in a wide variety of different types of cities, but also be able to paint a mosaic picture of individual impacts within each city. So for example, in Athens, we may be looking at tourism. In Freetown, it will be the impact on migration and those sorts of things. So together we'll get a clearer and more quantitative sense of the impact of heat in cities today. And finally, the final challenge is, how do we move from demonstrations and pilots to getting to scale? How do we start to move real money into this space to implement at the scale of the urgent need of the crisis? And so we're working with the climate champions to galvanize the insurance community, to start to develop innovative products that would support not just responses to heat waves, but also to bolster preparation for heat waves, and the creation of a pool capital stack, which would be a wide variety of different financing and funding options, from commercial all the way down to philanthropic, to help fund the projects at a large scale in cities. And we'll be piloting this and launching this later this year at COP. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to our organizers, and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much for your time.
Much, Kurt. It was an interesting and quick overview of what the Arsht-Rockefeller Resilience Center is doing. It's a lot of practical things that can be done in other cities also. So thank you very much. Now let's move on to our next presenter. So she is the head of the Climate Change Resilience Department of the City of Cape Town, and an interesting presentation of what the city is doing. Let's all welcome Amy Davison.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my presentation. Thanks. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a discussion today about what's happening on the ground in Cape Town, and I think a lot of what I'm going to say applies to many other cities in the world as well. And then a little bit about what we're doing to address heat in our city. So just in case anybody's not aware of where Cape Town is, we're a municipality, a metropolitan municipality in the sort of bottom left-hand corner of South Africa, at the very southwestern tip of the African continent. I've just circled it in red over there. And we're a very large municipality. We're about 2,500 square kilometers, and approximately 4 million people live in Cape Town. So why is heat a problem in Cape Town and other cities? Well, firstly, there is the issue of urban heat islands and spatial inequality. There's many dense neighborhoods with few green spaces and few trees. And so those neighborhoods become very hot in summer during heat events. That graph at the bottom shows you a very good example of how the urban heat islands can be up to 5 degrees hotter than the surrounding suburbs. And the map on the right is from a study that we've recently conducted in Cape Town to show, to map where the urban heat islands are, and those map very closely with areas of high urban density. Obviously, as already been mentioned, the health impacts of heat are very much a concern for us, especially heat-related mortality, as well as the increased demand for public health facilities, and then elderly residents being very much at risk during heat waves and high heat day events. And I think what's really important to recognize is that as global temperatures increase, it's not just the average temperature, but the number and intensity of heat waves will increase over time, and therefore more people will be exposed to extreme heat events than previously had been. And another thing that's really important is that many homes in South Africa and in cities of the global south are not really designed for heat and lack access to artificial cooling. So there may be informal dwellings which are made from materials with very poor thermal performance, such as corrugated iron. It may not have good ventilation and can be extremely hot inside in summer. There's older public housing buildings which are not designed for heat or were designed and built in an era when that kind of thing wasn't really thought about. And although we do work to include green building interventions in new low-income housing projects, they can add quite a bit of cost and complexity to the projects if they're not planned up front. And so that needs to be planned at the very early stage of a project before it gets started. Otherwise, it's too late to do it at that point. It also creates some challenges for us at public cooling facilities. We have some lovely municipal swimming pools that get very popular in summertime, but the demand is really for cooling rather than swimming. So people want to enjoy the water for the cooling and not to swim laps. And so it's a lot of space taken up by a very large pool, with only a small part of it gets used for the cooling aspect. And that also leads to the issues of safety challenges and drownings. People may not know how to swim very well. Using swimming pools and using the ocean can be at high risk from drowning or other incidents. And then we also see quite a lot of severe traffic congestion and crowding at our beaches in the summer season, which can often lead to a lot of frustration and unhappiness. And then a really major issue for Cape Town, because we have a major national park and lots of nature reserves situated within our boundaries, there's a very highly increased risk of wildfire at the urban interface. So where the urban area meets the natural area, which culminated recently in a very devastating fire at the University of Cape Town, in which some very important books and the library area burned. So that's a huge concern for Cape Town is the issue of increased risk of fire. So what we've done so far is we have done this urban heat island mapping. We've mapped these risk areas. And we found that these really include dense urban areas such as the central business district, as well as other business districts. Industrial areas such as the airport and manufacturing zones are very much within these red hotspots of heat islands. And dense informal settlements also have very little green space and lots of surfaces which really absorb heat, and those have been identified as hotspots. And it is very much linked to densification around the major transport corridors. You can see here the main roads are those black lines. And obviously we want densification. It's really important for public transport and has a lot of other good reasons to densify. But it needs to be done in a way that takes into account the urban heat island effect and can put in place measures to mitigate that. We're also busy with historical temperature analysis. It's currently in process. I don't have any nice graphs to show you at the moment. Data is from 9 stations operated by the South African Weather Service within Cape Town, of which 5 are in urban areas and 4 in non-urban areas. And the initial results are showing us that there's between 1 and 4 heat waves, which in Cape Town is defined as 3 or more days or more in a row of 32 degrees Celsius or hotter. That's per year, about between 4 and 7 days of duration. And it's not uniform spatially. So it may occur in some parts of the city, but not in other parts of the city. As I said, it's 2,500 square kilometers. It's a very large area. And so some parts can be very hot, while others are only moderately hot. So I'm just going to then talk you through some various solutions that we're using or that are in various stages of planning and implementation. So one of the things we've have implemented and are looking to implement more in the future is spray parks as a safer, low water and lower cost cooling option instead of pools. There's obviously much lower risk of drowning. It uses much less water, and Cape Town being a water scarce city that's really important. And they obviously provide a lot of fun for the whole family. We also focused in our tree planting on planting mature water-wise trees because those have higher survival rates. We find when we plant saplings or very small trees, they don't survive very well and are very hot and dry conditions. And so planting mature trees and using captured rainwater for watering them is a strategy that's been very effective. There's also been work from our Parks Department to map the locations of existing trees and therefore to prioritize tree-poor neighborhoods and areas that have been identified as heat islands for tree planting programs. And there's also been a project recently to map the tree canopy cover in the city using GIS technology that has shown us, again, which areas of the city are lacking in tree cover so that those can be prioritized. There's also various projects that occur across the city with community groups to grow and maintain urban green spaces, and that ranges from things like simple planting projects, food gardens, and a range of different initiatives. We are also in the process of developing a heatwave and high heat day operating procedure for city facilities, especially with a focus on public health. So when we know that a heat wave or high heat day is forecast, it can be activated, and we can ensure that our city facilities are prepared for heat events and can respond accordingly. And also as part of that, we'll ensure that outdoor workers have the correct PPE to work outdoors in the heat, whether that's hats, sunglasses, sunscreen, and appropriate light-colored clothing, and also to make sure that we can set outdoor working hours for the cooler parts of the day, so we don't have our outdoor workers working in very dangerous conditions. We also currently have in place a summer readiness plan, and part of the goal of the summer readiness plan is to ensure that we are sufficiently prepared for these very hot days and heat waves. That means having enough lifeguards on our beaches and at our pools, ensuring traffic and crowd control at those facilities, and also making sure that there's law enforcement at those beaches to make sure that there's adequate crowd control and that everything stays safe for everyone. We're also looking at a cooling center program, so making use of existing cool or artificially cooled public facilities, such as libraries, as cooling centers during heat waves, and also developing new cooling centers. Our Disaster Risk Management Center also conducts public awareness campaigns about heat waves and heat risks. They hand out a lot of information and do a lot of community engagement to make sure people are aware of the risk and what to do during a heat event. And then this is a very interesting exercise. This was a government training exercise for local government officials using an adaptive management exercise to simulate a heat wave response. So to get everybody together in a room to find out, what would we do during a major heat wave and what are the different responses that are required. We're also just about to launch a process of developing a real-time heat monitoring network, specifically focusing on urban heat island areas so that we can get a sense of what is happening on the ground in real time, so going beyond the forecast. And then finally, a strong focus on reducing wildfire risk by removing invasive species, maintaining fire breaks, and conducting controlled ecological burns to make sure that our natural vegetation stays in good order and the risk of fire is reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. This is wonderful. There are a few questions already at the chat that relate to your presentation, so thank you. So I would like to go to Athens and ask Lenio to take over and take us through the journey of Athens in responding to urban heat and extreme heat.
Thank you for having me, Lina. It's great to be back to this series, and Amy and Kurt have really set the ground beautifully for my presentation. And also, I just wanted to say all of the stuff that Cape Town is doing is really, really amazing. And there are cities that are really waking up and doing great work on heat. And through networks like Resilient Cities Network, we're really learning a lot from each other and talking to each other and figuring out how to do things. And then with the support of the Arsht-Rock stuff, things can actually get going more clearly and faster for cities that really need support. So let me start sharing and stop blabbing. Okay. Can you see it okay? Or no?
Lenio, we can see the presenter slide.
Okay, we're getting there. Is that okay?
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Okay. So, as we've talked about, global temperatures are rising steadily, and as Kurt mentioned, the 1.6 billion that are going to be facing high temperatures by 2050. We know that right now it's 350 cities that where people face temperatures above 35 degrees. And these cities are going to grow to close to 1,000 cities by 2050, which is where the 1.6 billion comes to. And we know that heat, I mean, we do, but few people know that heat is the most dangerous of all extreme weather phenomena, and leaving a lot of mortality and morbidity victims behind every time. Athens is one of the cities that is part of a metropolitan area with another 38 municipalities around it, and it's extremely densely built and densely populated. This is a view of the city, and this is another view of the city. A lot of cement and asphalt. About 80% of the city is covered by impermeable surfaces, which is a very big problem for heat, because these types of surfaces are making our cities into death traps, because they absorb and they store heat and radiate it at night. And we have one of the lesser per capita square meterage for green. So we're one of the we have fewer green than other European cities, and it's very unevenly distributed in the city, which makes for great inequities. A few years ago, in 2017, we did the resilience strategy for Athens and asked the people to talk to us about what are things in the city that scare them. And we ended up with these 4 shocks and 4 stresses. And of course, heat was one of the things that most people were really worried about. This is an outline of our strategy. And back then in 2017, we already started talking and preparing for heat. But not with the intensity that we're doing now. We also had information from reports and research that showed that, for example, from 551 cities in Europe, Athens will have the single greatest impact from heat waves. And Moody's said that unless we do something quick, we're going to have problems with our ranking, with our what's it called, the credit rating. And this is a very quick kind of image of what's been happening with temperatures in Athens for the last couple of decades. It stops at 2010, but it keeps just going straight up. And we've had about an average of 15 to 25 days of extreme heat in Athens, and this is expected to double in the next couple of decades. And coupled with a decrease up to 12% of water, of rainfall, and Greece has actually already reached 1.9 degrees Celsius, is already 1.9 degrees Celsius above the level where it was in the pre-industrial era. And this is a very low estimate that in Athens, we will have 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise by 2050. This is a very good scenario. I'm not even going to talk about the 71 to 2100s. So we have an increased both frequency, duration, and temperatures in heat waves. We have a very strong urban heat island, which reaches, we reach about 10 degrees Celsius difference between the center of the city and the outskirts. And of course, we have a serious number of deaths in the city, which we know are underestimated. We are probably facing much, much more, even double the numbers that we're getting. And of course, energy rises and commercial activity declines, and we have a lot of different species that are kind of coming into the city and attacking local species, or local species that are not able to survive. Already we're seeing such issues. And last year we had this really, really deadly heat wave in the spring. I mean, in the summer, it's the end of July and in the beginning of August. And there was no report at all from the Greek media of the number of deaths that were related to this heat wave. So from political.eu calculated the number of excess deaths, correlating them to the average deaths in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, and in Turkey, I think, because that heat wave hit all of these cities, and figured out that Greece had an excess number of deaths that reached 2,400. And in the week where the temperatures were really, really high, it was 1,400 people died. As Kurt said, there's a lot of health issues that are related to extreme heat. And we know that outside workers, which we have a lot of them in Greece, are particularly vulnerable. So Athens, like Cape Town, did a serious mapping of its areas that are particularly vulnerable to heat. The green and the blue, except from the gray, which is the green areas, should not, we should change the colors, should not make you think that these are relatively cool. We start with the blue at 35 degrees Celsius and above. This is surface area temperatures. It's the average temperatures for five different years. So this is a way that we have started figuring out where it is and correlating them to canopy cover, to where the most mapped out vulnerability with seniors, young children, income distribution, et cetera. These maps are being created now because we had a census that was in 2011. So we're still kind of trying to create all these things. And what we're doing in Athens is we're thinking of the different actions in three big categories: awareness, preparedness, and redesign. And in awareness, Kurt talked about it. We've started categorizing heat waves, and the types of categories that we've created are, we're collaborating with a meteorological website and a research center that is giving us now every day, if we go above a specific temperature, the types of categories, and there's a whole messaging attached to each of them that is starting to disseminate, that basically targets the most vulnerable communities in the city. This is linked, of course, to preparedness. Categorizing heat waves makes it really good for policymakers to be able to create the right types of actions that can protect, again, when the event is happening. These are short-term actions that we have to protect, again, the ones that are most vulnerable. Some of them, Amy already mentioned. We have created an interesting app which gives you your personalized risk and where you are at real time and tells you where to go to take cover. But also we are doing things that other cities are doing or trying to set up, like the buddy system that New York has done, and We have an extensive help at home network within the city that goes to the people that live alone and are seniors, establishing non-working hours. And we have a strong collaboration with the Hellenic Red Cross and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent through our collaboration with the Arsht-Rockefeller Resilience Center. So it's like this is like a really kind of a powerhouse collaboration for dealing with these issues. This is the app that I was mentioning. And the most important thing, of course, is the aspect of redesign and redesigning the city. In cities like ours, the most important thing to do is large green corridors that cut through the metropolitan area and actually displace the cars in the streets and take over our public space, big chunks of our public space, so we can have connections between existing green spaces to have a circulation of air and of air masses. And this is the best type of cooling from what we have seen and what we have read. So we're trying to do this, taking advantage. One of the things that we're doing is trying to take advantage of this amazing ancient monument, Hadrian Aqueduct, which is a Roman aqueduct that runs through from the center of the city to one of the mountains nearby, 20 kilometers underground. An amazing engineering feat that has a lot of water in it that's perfect for irrigation that right now is not being used. So this is a big kind of development project, including 8 different municipalities that we're trying to do, as well as other kind of green and blue infrastructure projects. This is the aqueduct and how it traverses the whole area of the metropolitan area and the Attica region. And these are just a few examples of other cities which are really, really amazing, like Colombia having done 36 corridors, and France using the water of the Seine to cool specific districts. Melbourne has done an amazing urban nature strategy for supporting the biodiversity in the city. And South Korea, as we all know, has made this amazing, in Seoul, this amazing water corridor. And I will finish, is this it? I have one more slide. Just finish with talking about how amazing urban forests are and that they are the best thing that we can do in our cities today for combating heat. Thank you very much.
Very much, Lenio. A lot of interesting insights that you have shared there in what Athens is doing. Now we can see a lot of messages in our chat box. A few of our participants here have shared some studies as well as some links of the initiatives that they've been doing. So take a look and keep your questions coming. But let me start the Q&A portion. We have seen a question here and it's for Kurt. Kurt, there's a question here. What is the greatest challenge in raising awareness on urban heat, both to convince decision makers to take action and to educate the public? And then there's a follow-up question that says, how has this evolved over the last couple of years? So we have seen several initiatives that you have presented. Is heat becoming a more recognized issue right now?
Let me maybe start at the end and work my way back. Absolutely. I mean, I started working in this space back in 2011, and it felt like you were screaming into the void about this issue. And I feel now that there are so many very important, influential voices at just about every level, from local communities all the way up to national and international, that are not only talking about heat, but starting to link heat to their existing challenges that are galvanizing their activities where they are. So I think there is a lot happening in this space, and I do think there's a real opportunity for us to stay coordinated as a sort of a community of practitioners to make sure we keep that momentum going and keep driving it forward. In terms of I'll just answer this quickly. The greatest challenge around public awareness is that, first of all, your experience of heat is very different than mine. And at the same temperature for me, so today in DC, it's about 33 degrees centigrade. I'm very comfortable in my house. It's about, 28 degrees in my house right now. But my neighbor doesn't have air conditioning, and her experience of heat is much, much different. So there is a need to personalize the impact of heat that's hard to do through messaging, especially messaging that's coming just from a municipality or just from an authority, and everyone's getting the same message. And so I think one of the key challenges is how do we make sure that it's not just a message or a warning that's effective and evocative because it's coming from the authorities? How do we start to build that network of people, community health clinics, other groups that are interacting with vulnerable populations, that have relationships with those communities, that can actually help get the message to the person that needs it and tailor that message to the specific challenges that they may be having. So I think that's the next iteration that we need to be looking at here, is how do we get there?
Thank you, Kurt. And we actually have a lot of questions coming through. So there was an initial question, and I think it was triggered by Amy's map on the heat islands, and then also Lenio showed a similar map. And a lot of people here are trying to understand, what has been the approach behind it, like with whom you worked with, what was the availability of data, what do you do in cases that you don't have data in your own city? Could you share a bit of more information about this? Amy, do you want to start, and then Lenio can take over?
Thanks. So I can tell you about our heat island mapping was part of a larger project, which was a climate change hazard vulnerability and risk assessment study. That was very generously funded by the French Development Bank as part of a grant to the city of Cape Town. And that was conducted by a local team of experts. And so specifically for heat islands, that was based on a combination of solar radiation data, wind speed, and land cover data. So some of that was sourced from publicly available databases, and some of that was provided by the City of Cape Town from our own data. So it is definitely publicly available. The study is on our website, and so it is available to view as a PDF map. But if anybody would like to engage in more detail about that, they're welcome to contact me. Thanks.
I think what Amy said is really important. A lot of cities are trying to do it, and each city is doing it in a different way. But often the best way to do it is a combination between publicly available data and data that can be collected from different, sometimes different players in the public sector. Like often different big companies are willing to share these types of data with cities, and in order to kind of work together with municipalities to develop something. Research centers are often offering them also for free, and also some of them is already collected by the municipality. Sometimes you have to be a little bit inventive with the type of data. Like, for example, sometimes figuring out how to calculate extreme poverty and where it is located in your city. Sometimes this is sensitive data, so you have to be really kind of creative with how you can get them. And you can try to get only the zip codes without any attachment to names, or so it's a really kind of it's an interesting and iterative and combinatory process that each city kind of embarks, and it's a bit of an adventure. Some cities do, get students on bikes with sensors and kind of measure heat with, collaboration with the university. Some of the data they have from satellites, and they combine them with local data, which is a great thing to do, locally assessed data. So it's a lot of things that can be done. I think Amy's was one of the really very strong scientific kind of approach. So it's the first step for all of us. I mean, this is something we are all doing to try to map out where vulnerability is and where heat is most severe.
You can see the contrast as well as some of the similarities of what Cape Town and Athens is doing. But another question, there are several questions here that maybe we can combine. So I want to ask Kurt first. how might we work with different stakeholders or the different organizations, city governments, communities, think tanks, working their different initiatives? How can we leverage and complement each other in terms of the work on urban heat? And then the follow-up question would be for Lenio and Amy. One of the biggest challenge Irene mentioned in Montreal is reaching the most vulnerable, the isolated, and the marginalized population. So the question is, what are you doing in your respective cities? So let's ask Kurt first, and then over to Amy and Lenio.
Sorry, Leslie, could you just repeat the first question very quickly?
So the question is, how might the work of different stakeholders, city governments, communities of practice, think tanks, and other organizations in this sphere or in this space leverage as well as complement each other?
Got it. Okay, thank you. So first of all, I think what we're seeing cities do now is start to put in place heat action plans and planning processes that are similar to other, sustainability planning, resilience planning, even into, zoning and other sort of land use type planning. We're seeing a similar movement around heat planning. And where I think that has created an opportunity in cities to engage civil society, to engage communities, to bring them into that process in a formal way. And so I think in terms of speaking from a municipality's perspective, I think that has been one of the key ways that voices can be heard, issues can be surfaced. Because the reality of this is, the reason a city might want to work on heat may not be just because of the temperature. It may be because of other politically sensitive or politically important aspects. And so understanding how people are viewing their experience of heat is actually critical to designing an effective plan and knowing who to pull into that. So inclusion from the very early stages is what we see as a good practice that cities are doing. And it's resulting in plans that are effective and are implementable and that are where there's a good uptake and acceptance of those plans. So I think that's probably the key. And frankly, that applies to all of us that aren't necessarily in cities but are trying to support cities. We all have different approaches. We all have different expertise. And I think a certain amount of humility and partnership is really critical to making sure that we're doing the actual work that matters, which is making change on the ground and building heat resilience on the ground. And I think that's something that just generally philosophically is how this will move forward in a way that's effective.
Thanks, Kurt. Maybe Amy and Lenio can share also.
Thank you. Yeah, just very briefly, as I mentioned, our Disaster Risk Management Center is very focused on public outreach around heat, distributing pamphlets with information. There's a new booklet on how to respond to heat that they've just developed. And especially at big events and for example, at beaches or at crowded public places in summer. And I think I just wanted to mention one other thing that we're hoping to get started as part of this new heat action plan is to work with our neighborhood watch groups. There's a lot of neighborhood watch groups that are very active in Cape Town, and to sort of capacitate them, to activate them to be able to check on elderly people during a heat wave, for example, to know where the vulnerable people are and to be a point of outreach during a heat event. Thanks.
I think that in Athens, we're doing the same. I think this is probably one of the most effective things that we can do, like to work together with the people, the group of people that are in municipalities that can be, like we have this thing called Help at Home, which was actually, it got multiplied during COVID. So this was like something that we're stepping on now to reach people at home and help them deal with heat. But also basically what Amy said is really important. Like you have to have volunteers and people in neighborhoods that you mobilize them and you build capacity and kind of make it clear that these people, you have to check in with them. The people that live alone, that are older people, you really have to check in when temperatures start going up. So this is a big kind of trying to raise awareness issue. But as Kurt said, it's really, it's not easy, especially in countries like our countries where people are used to heat. I'm talking about Athens and Cape Town. It's really difficult to persuade them to take heat exposure seriously. So it's, it really, even at the level of persuading them that this is really, it's a different type of heat that we're talking about. It's not the same as it was a few years ago, and you shouldn't just brush it off, but you should change the way that you handle yourself within your everyday kind of conditions. This is, as Kurt said, it's a very difficult issue to change behavior and to change. You first have to change their minds, and it's an uphill battle. And I think the Red Cross for us has been also a really, I should mention it again, has been a really great ally, because the Red Cross has a really good reputation. Like, people respect it and believe it, and you know, it's easy for Red Cross people to knock on doors, or people that have been trained and say, you know, we are, you know, working together with the Red Cross to knock on doors and check and help people. So we're kind of asking the Red Cross to do a lot of seminars and build capacity and make like neighborhood people also know better what to do. And but you know, we're working on the same, we're kind of on the same path as Amy just mentioned. I think that this is the most important, kind of the most vulnerable. But also, just to finish, there's a whole other group, which is the people that are the outdoor workers, which again Amy mentioned, but I didn't mention almost at all. But this is also something that we hardly think about, and this is another issue that we really have to keep conscious about. Who's working outdoors, any kind of jobs outdoors, but any kind of physical jobs too. We know that there's a lot of work-related injuries that really spike up during heat, and this is something that we really have to start preparing for as well.
Thank you, Lenio. There are a few questions around heat planning and changing of planning codes and planning and guidelines. Amy, Lenio, and also Kurt, do you want to say a few things around what you're currently doing in terms of changing the planning guidelines, the challenges you're facing around it? Because in the end of the day, it's about designing our cities differently, right? So I don't know, who would like to start?
Well, I can start if you want. I can. And there's a lot of policy that has to change, and we are really trying. It's again something that, as Kurt said, the consciousness around heat is just starting to really explode, but it's all new. So we're just starting to talk about different types of policies and different type of legal kind of guidelines from the central government about you know, different kind of zoning and building laws, and not just energy upgrades, but heat upgrades when they're subsidized, and all these types of things. I just, Kurt maybe knows more than me about all of this, but I just wanted to say that one of the most difficult things I think that I'm faced with in Athens, the biggest challenges for change has been to try to move from gray infrastructure to green infrastructure, both in the public sector and in the private sector, because it's all new to both designers, engineers, and people that are actually implementing the works. And it's really, really difficult to get people to do something differently from what they've been used to do for decades. And there's also issues that have to do with liability, but there's also issues that have to do with profit. So it's really difficult for people to see how they can get profit if they don't use cement and concrete, for example. So it's really, really, really difficult both to find really good designers, but also really good designers that can explain and can make the right kind of choices and the right kind of technical designs. How do you call it? The last kind of level of designs that can be actually implemented. That's a really, really difficult part, and it's a really important part of the chain of things that have to change in the way that we design things, because we definitely have to go towards green and blue solutions in our cities.
Thank you, Lenio. We're just a minute away of closing the session. So Amy and Kurt, do you want to complement what Lenio just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can agree that policy is a big planning policy is a really important area for heat planning. I would say we're still at an early stage of that in Cape Town. I can't tell you that we've yet solved that problem, but it's something we're working on integrating into our spatial development framework and into the district spatial plans. Hopefully in the next few years, I'll be able to say that we have achieved that. Thanks.
I would just quickly shout out a couple of resources that may be of interest, and I can send these to you to share with the group more broadly. But a new paper at how heat policy has been developed in the U.S., looking at about 150 U.S. cities by Kelly Turner from UCLA. An excellent look at how this has happened and what needs to change to make it happen in a more effective way. The work of Lad Keith, Melissa Guardaro, and Sarah Miro at Arizona State University and University of Arizona on really starting to understand how heat is infused into all existing city planning type devices. Now, it's mostly focused on the US, but many of these plans will have analogs where you are, and really starting to tease out how heat is being dealt with in these other plans and how it can be made more coherent. And then at the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, SMAP, along with the Sustainable Cities, put out a cooling toolkit that is more focused on the planning process with a developing country city in mind. And again, I'll share resources with that separately, but just to highlight those as really great resources that aren't from us, but are, I think, really wonderful additions to the space.
Thank you, Kurt. This was a very productive discussion, and still there are questions coming. Unfortunately, we need to close the session. All the presentations and the recording will be online next week. I would like to thank the speakers for their contributions. We will continue having discussions around urban heat. That's not over yet. I want to thank all the speakers for joining, and please join us in a couple of weeks for the actual first session in Latin America, specifically on circularity and plastic pollution. So see you all soon. Have a great rest of the day.